On today's show, we are going to discuss 21 of the most interesting wide receivers for fantasy football this season. We'll hit on a few categories, guys in new roles, year two breakout candidates. We'll check in on aging veterans. And of course, we'll talk about the important rookies. Be sure to stay tuned to the end of the show as we will get Matt's two most overrated and two most underrated NFL wide receivers. All right, Matt, we have a bunch of guys in new roles this season. I want to start there because I think it's really interesting. The first one to me is the guy with arguably the biggest role change this year, and that is DeVonta Smith. We have not seen DeVonta Smith really in the alpha role in a long time. Obviously, he did it back in college when he won the Heisman. On a per route basis, we can look at this when A.J. Brown has been off the field. DeVonta Smith has been very, very, very good, showing alpha-like underlying metrics. That is a smallish sample, though. Matt, what say you about DeVonta Smith's ability to become the alpha here for the Eagles?
Yeah, I'm really excited about DeVonta Smith this year. I think he's a guy who's probably overdue for a promotion from the secondary receiver to a number one receiver role. And I mean, we have seen him, at least in his rookie season, be the number one guy on the team. And I think the interesting part for him this year is obviously the Eagles are transitioning to a new offensive environment. I think there's no question things will look different with Sean Mannion this year than some of what it's looked like with Jalen Hurts just throughout his tenure. Obviously, it was like the most exaggerated version of this last year, but the very static, like spread and shred world in which they've lived in with Jalen Hurts. But the good news for DeVonta Smith is that I think he can live in both worlds, which is probably what they'll try to have afoot in each camp this year. From 2021 to 2023, Smith took 79.8% of his sampled snaps outside in reception perception and 70% snaps on the ball. So we've seen him be a primary outside X receiver in the NFL before, even if he's been in the slot the last 2 years. But if you want to kick him inside and you want to have him run, quick patterns and everything like that, or some of the more long developing like big dig routes or out cuts that you'll want to have in a Sean Mannion style, what I'm imagining to be a Green Bay type of offense, he can do either one of those things. So this is one of the best separators in the NFL. In 2024, A.J. Brown was number one in success rate versus man coverage. That season, DeVonta Smith was number two. Like, this is a very, very quality receiver who is, like I said, I think overdue for a promotion to a number one receiver role. I don't really have any questions about Smith performing in isolation as that guy. Obviously, the questions for him are just the environment around him.
Yeah, and despite that environment, Evan, DeVonta Smith is going very high. You have him 28th overall ADP, and I'm looking at season-long ADP now on Yahoo. Shout out to Matt. I'm looking at season-long ADP now, and 33 overall is DeVonta Smith. So we're not sneaking this one past anyone, obviously. Evan, any thoughts on what Matt said about DeVonta here?
The biggest knock on DeVonta Smith ever since he came out of college, always, nicknamed the Slim Reaper, 170 pounds. I have a level of confidence that he's going to be able to excel in this number one receiver role. Do you think that, Matt, that being 170 pounds, he's probably a little heavier now than he was when he came out of Alabama, but do you think that poses any kind of hindrance to DeVonta Smith being a full-time number one receiver over a 17-game schedule?
From a health perspective, maybe, I think that's obviously just the question is, can you absorb that amount of punishment? We're going to talk about that with another guy here in the new roles section as well. But from like a being able to win on the field perspective, I haven't seen that so far through his NFL career. Last year, 77.6% success rate versus press, which is an 83rd percentile mark. He's never fallen below 77% in any pro season. It was one of the better marks in his prospect profile. He's always been someone that can win against press, even when he's stuck to the boundary. So I don't really have any questions like, in terms of skill set wise. It's just physically, can he hold up to the punishment at that weight? But this is a guy who's generally been pretty healthy throughout the course of his NFL career. So yeah, to me, it's just mostly about the pass volume here for him and everything like that. But his ability to play more X receiver, we've already seen him do it and win against press coverage. Again, a lot of proof that he can be that guy.
I mean, people want to knock Jalen Hurts for not being able to support NFL wide receivers. That's just not true historically. Yes, perhaps it was underperforming last year, but man, DeVonta as the number two has had huge seasons with Jalen Hurts, and obviously A.J. Brown has had huge seasons as well. Let's go to the Jets and Garrett Wilson. I don't even know if I want to call this new role for Garrett Wilson, but it feels like this is the first time he's been A, healthy, and B, had like a reasonably talented offense around him. Not the most talented offense in the world, but a reasonable offensive line, reasonable weaponry. And if you think Geno Smith's season with the Raiders was an outlier, maybe like okay quarterback play or better than what he has had. He has had the worst quarterback play for most of his career, has Garrett Wilson. So people don't want to click this, Harmon. We are above market based on Garrett Wilson's underlying stats, historicals, target competition. We're above market here. People don't really want to click Garrett Wilson. What do you think about him with Geno this year?
I get it. I mean, Frank Reich is the offensive coordinator too. It's just, I don't have a lot of optimism about that. The frustrating part about last year with Garrett Wilson is that I actually think that Tanner Engstrand, the former offensive coordinator there, got like the passing game right in New York from a design perspective, from a Garrett Wilson role perspective. I mean, in the first, couple of seasons of his, when really the first the 2 seasons under Nathaniel Hackett, the Aaron Rodgers, like bizarro offense, Garrett Wilson mostly had to play, X receiver for this team. Even once Davante Adams got there, they used him more as a slot option, which Garrett Wilson can win in that role, but he's more maximized, I think, when you use him off ball and kind of allow him to move around, which they did last year. Just the run game was terribly designed, and Justin Fields didn't fit the passing game. It was obviously a mess last year, but Wilson was pretty productive on a per game basis last year. He still led the Jets in receiving, despite the fact that he didn't catch a pass from like mid-October on or something like that. He's just one of the most talented receivers and separators in the NFL. And I have to imagine this year, with A.D. Mitchell kind of cemented as that X-only option, they're going to move Garrett Wilson around. He's going to play a lot more Z. He's going to play a lot more slot. So the opportunity should be there for him. The question is just obviously, can Geno hang on to this job? And do they go to Cade Klubnik at some point? I was just talking about this literally this morning with Nate Tice on Football 301. I think the Cade Klubnik pick is kind of a canary in the coal mine for Frank Reich. Probably has not evolved as an offensive mind, because remember, like Frank Reich, when he's even with the Eagles and they were having a lot of success, it's a lot of 11 personnel RPOs, 11 personnel RPO, and that's a lot of what Cade Klubnik, just a ton of RPOs at Clemson. So I don't have a lot of optimism about the Jets offense as a whole, but Wilson is enough of a talent. He's a fringe top 10, top 12 receiver talent in the league, and should continue even with all these interesting pieces around him to dominate targets.
Yeah, I mean, we are at 35 overall in half PPR on Garrett Wilson, which I think is like reasonable, all things considered, how good he is, the target competition, etc. But market doesn't want him. 42 overall is the ADP here on Garrett Wilson. Let's go to Jaylen Waddle is in a new role. Jaylen Waddle was the second fiddle to Tyreek Hill for a while. We didn't get a huge sample of him after Tyreek went down, or we did have a sample, but it was just such a mess there in Miami. But anyways, regardless, now he goes to Denver on a big deal to be the alpha for Bo Nix. Harmon, what do you think about the outlook for Jaylen Waddle in this new role with the Broncos?
Jaylen Waddle is flat out the most mispriced player in fantasy this year. I think he is just set up to absolutely cook in Denver. And there's a lot of things that I think people don't understand about Jaylen Waddle. One is just how good he is. It still feels like there's kind of a contingent that thinks he's just not that good of a receiver or anything like that. I know he didn't explode with Tyreek Hill out last year, but part of that is, number one, they just didn't run a lot of plays. I think they were one of the fewest teams in terms of plays run per game, not a lot of pass attempts. That's going to change in Denver for sure. The other thing I think people don't realize about Jaylen Waddle is, because they did all the fun move around stuff with Tyreek Hill, getting him in the slot, get him in the Z spot to like move around the formation. Jaylen Waddle, despite this not really being like his prototypical, size or skill set, he's had to be the X receiver for this team. From 2022 to 2024, he averaged a 77% outside alignment rate, was on the ball for 81% of his sampled snaps. And, that really only increased like over the course of those 3 seasons, his rate of snaps on the ball. And still, even last year without Tyreek Hill, 79% snaps on the line of scrimmage, 84% outside. That, number one, is already you're playing kind of the hardest receiver role, especially with a quarterback who gets the ball out so fast into a, those routes just don't have a chance to develop, especially when you're kind of a vertical receiver. So with Cortland Sutton as the X, and I think Pat Bryant probably as the, kind of big slot receiver, we're going to see Jaylen Waddle used more like 2016 Brandon Cooks in this offense, where Cooks that year actually took his highest rate of snaps off the line of scrimmage and big breaking routes, not just down the field, but quick hitters as well. I mean, there were weeks last year, long stretches of the season last year, where Troy Franklin is out targeting Cortland Sutton. That's not because Troy Franklin's a better receiver than Cortland Sutton. That's because that offense wants to hit those layups and everything. And now Jaylen Waddle is essentially going to be that guy. I just think Waddle, to me, I have him ranked as like, wide receiver 12 this season, like a top 4, like easy top 30-ish type of guy in fantasy this year. I know that Davis Webb, the new OC, said this, but I said it first. Okay, Davis. I said that this reminded me a lot of when the Bills traded for Stephon Diggs, and like Josh Allen was in year 3. Diggs, people knew he was good, but they didn't know how good he was. That's the type of effect I think Waddle's going to have in Denver.
Getting Stephon Diggs in Buffalo, that was the turning point really in Josh Allen's career. So the Broncos do a ton of stuff around the line of scrimmage, but I mean, they want to test deep. Like Bo Nix last year was number 5 in the NFL in intended air yards. And if you look, I was looking at the reception perception route chart for Jaylen Waddle before the show. This guy wins downfield. The Broncos give up a first and a third to get him. They have the best offensive line in the league, according to Brandon Thorne's ranking. So they're going to have protection. I think Jaylen Waddle is a guy to get excited about. I love hearing you talk him up.
I mean, from a strategy perspective here, this is why I've been talking about, and I always talk about this in season long, the running back heavy starts, but Jaylen Waddle available 49.3 ADP in season long right now. And like we just talked about, Garrett Wilson at 43 overall. You can get really strong wide receiver rooms here through rounds 4, 5, 6, 3, 4, 5, 6, really. And yeah, just from a strategy perspective, I think that's at a minimum interesting. And I mean, the underlying data supports what Harmon is saying about Jaylen Waddle. Even last year, it was such a mess in Miami. Still 2.19 yards per route run. Remember, he had those 2 seasons, 2.52, 2.46. Like, he's been really, really good from a data perspective. Also has Jaylen Waddle. Let's go to Ladd McConkey. I'm calling this a new role, Harmon, because I made the mistake last year of thinking Ladd McConkey's role would not be overly affected by Keenan Allen. Turned out that it was extremely affected by Keenan Allen. Now we get Keenan gone, Mike McDaniel in. Harmon, what do you think about Ladd in hopefully the role that I thought he would have last year?
I do think it will, kind of from a route alignment perspective, route diet perspective, look pretty similar to what it looked like for Ladd McConkey last year. Because like Keenan came in there and just ate all the layup routes, all the easy stuff. And look, I think one of the things I've learned over the years, like where I've made mistakes, is like speaking to like in absolutes when it comes to receiver decline, because there are guys that, they go right off the cliff, and we've seen that with players, but there are other players that like age pretty gracefully. And, I think Keenan Allen's been in some level of decline for like 5 years, but it's never gone right off the cliff. He actually still was a totally useful player for the Chargers last year. So I don't think it's like, obviously you don't want to be a second-year player and get, kind of iced by Keenan Allen at that point in your career, but it's not as embarrassing, I think, as it's kind of painted for Ladd McConkey. But it really doesn't matter, because in this offense with Mike McDaniel, where they're going to run a lot more heavy personnel, they're going to run routes in the intermediate area of the field where Ladd McConkey is truly at his best. I mean, this is not some pop gun slot receiver. He's much more of like a downfield breaking route type of player. Even last year, they still wanted to get him on those bigger out cuts and everything off play action. The problem is they just didn't have the offensive line to, make that happen. So everything to me from an environment perspective looks really good for Ladd McConkey. Watching him, for reception perception last year, his charting data didn't really change at all. So the only thing you can maybe criticize him for is that he wasn't as good in 50-50 ball situations. His contested catch rate came down from year 1 to year 2, but from a separation perspective, from getting open, like he still was the same guy from year 1 to year 2, almost no decline across the board in success rate versus man or zone coverage. The only question with Ladd McConkey, we mentioned this with DeVonta Smith, is can his body handle like 140 plus targets? Because even through the first 2 seasons of his career, while he's been really good on those intermediate routes and down the football field and everything like that, he gets himself rocked and like has to scrape himself off the football field. But truly, that is the only thing I think that would kind of prohibit him from having like a true wide receiver one fantasy season. Cause otherwise, like every variable you want is there for Ladd McConkey.
Also was injured a lot in college was Ladd McConkey, which I think is notable there to that point. The thing that sticks in my head, Silva, is what Harmon said. If you're that good, and I'm glad to hear Harmon say this about the tape and underlying and separation and all that, because in my head is if you can really get outplayed by Keenan Allen and at times Quentin Johnston, who we'll get to, how good can you actually be? You know what I mean? And like, I get that maybe that's not like the sharpest take, but it's at least in my head. I kind of want to brush that off though, because I do want to be high on Ladd. Silva, I believe you're above market on Ladd, if I'm not mistaken here, but
I've been getting them a lot in best ball drafts.
Way above market on Ladd. Yeah, 29 overall for Silva.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's just a cinch that getting the tackles back, Mike McDaniel, Ladd McConkey's going to be the number one receiver. Layup stuff is, Ladd McConkey's going to get that Keenan Allen left behind. The interesting guy to me is like Quentin Johnston, Trey Harris, then who's going to win that number 2 receiver job on a team that's going to use a bunch of multiple tight end sets, because I think that player can have a lot of value. And so far, Daniel Popper does a great job covering the Chargers. Actually, he's now moving to a national role, I believe, but has covered the Chargers as well as any beat reporter in the nation for the last several years. He's made it sound like Quentin Johnston has the number 2 receiver job locked up. Do you have any thoughts on how Trey Harris looked to you as a rookie? Could he maybe challenge Quentin Johnston?
I think first, just on Quentin Johnston, I said this to my co-host on Reception Perception, the show, James Coe. I was like, dude, mostly him, but kind of the football world at large, like still kind of holding Quentin Johnston's rookie season against him, I think a little bit too hard. Like there's no question that was one of the worst rookie seasons of all time in reception perception for sure. It's like first percentile success rate versus man, press coverage, the whole deal. But we can also kind of acknowledge he was really set up to fail in the particular vertical X receiver role that he had, especially under the first coaching staff that he played for. They did kind of change up his route tree at times last year, but now he's kind of like a 22nd percentile success rate versus man player, 24th percentile. So like he's not the worst receiver in the NFL. He's just kind of like a solid starter essentially with I would sort of compare him to Corey Davis with the Tennessee Titans. Like we launched a player comparison tool on the site this year where you can look back through the whole history of RP data. And that's one that pops up for him. And I think that also makes sense from like a fantasy perspective where if he's going to be one of the 2 receivers on the field in heavy personnel that year where Corey Davis, his final year in Tennessee, him and A.J. Brown were both like top 5 in yards per route run that year because they were running so few 11 personnel and just taking deep shots off play action. I think Quentin Johnston could have a season like that. Trey Harris was interesting last year because I viewed him as kind of a mostly vertical X receiver prospect coming out of Ole Miss, but he was used more all over the formation in the slot as like a blocker. So I do think he will pose an interesting challenge and maybe can mix in here, but I think QJ kind of has that second receiver spot, not totally locked down, but pretty well locked down at this point.
Yeah, well, this is one of me and Evan's biggest debates. I mean, Quentin Johnston is going in the 60s now in best ball, which I think is absolutely egregious, Harmon. I'm not going to be as nice as you. I think Quentin Johnston in the 60s is absolutely egregious. Like,
well,
yes,
I don't have him in the 60s either.
He's better than his rookie year, but he still sucks. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't mean that just because you're better than literally the worst rookie season of all time doesn't mean that you're now good. And like, yeah, I'm excited to see Trey Harris here in year 2. And yeah, I think the gap between Trey Harris, who goes around 180, and Quentin Johnston, who goes in the 60s, is massive. Now, if you want to talk to me about season long, that's a different story. The Yahoo ADP is around 110 on Quentin Johnston, and that's obviously much, much, much more palatable to me there at 110. I'd consider taking him there at 110 for sure. All right. Peak drafting season is nearly upon us. If you have a fantasy draft coming up, we can certainly help. The early bird bundle product on ETR is now live. Combines DraftKit Pro, aka Silva's top 150, all our ETR ranks, Thorman's in-season rankings, tons more. Combines that with our in-season product, aka all our projections, premium shows, including man versus machine in-season, Silva's matchups, Thorn OLDL mismatches. For details on the bundle or just DraftKit Pro, head to the subscribe tab on establishtherun.com. That is the subscribe tab on establishtherun.com. Oh, here's a controversial one, Harmon. Let's go to Parker Washington. There are a lot of Parker Washington haters out there who say, yeah, he had no pedigree. You know, he wasn't a big college performer. He has this really small sample of production last year. And now people are going nuts about Parker Washington over highly touted prospects such as Brian Thomas, Travis Hunter, etc. So very interested in this one, Harmon. Do you think Parker Washington is actually good enough to say lead the Jaguars in yards and receptions this year?
Yeah, I'll just say to like pull back on the Jags receiver room as a whole. I do kind of think from a base case outcome, this probably looks like the Packers receiver rooms of the last few years where 4 guys get involved because, you know, I know the internet wants like to make Travis Hunter he's not just going to play cornerback. And I actually kind of like the fact that they've talked about how he's going to play more X receiver this year and run a more vertical route tree. In a weird way, his role as a rookie was 1, 2, like much, throwing him, you know, the whole playbook and the whole deal, but also too limited in that it was just kind of cookie cutter gadget targets to start, where he really started to get cooking right before the injury when they unfurled his routes as like more of a deep guy and let him run, because his best stuff comes against press man coverage. He still is kind of not totally on the details in terms of zone coverage and everything, and that bears out in his charting, but he's going to play receiver, you know, a little bit at least here. I would say maybe 20% of the routes, maybe 30%, which is enough to eat into the other 3 guys who are also really good in their own right, in addition to the fact that they're going to play 2 tight ends in the whole deal. But for Parker Washington in particular, you know, he is an interesting player because I compared him coming to the NFL to Bud Light Golden Tate was my player comparison for him. And Golden Tate was a guy who was a pretty solid separator, pretty solid route runner, better from the slot, but more of a downfield slot receiver who could win in tight coverage and win with the ball in his hands as a tackle breaker. And while Parker Washington, I would say, was maybe like an average separator against man coverage, once they got him into the slot, his success rate versus zone coverage really kicked up. And that's something I think people don't realize for Parker Washington either. And it's a big piece of context about his season. He was only in the slot like towards the end of the year. He was actually like a boundary outside reserve receiver to start the season, you know, playing behind De'Ami Brown, which was a terrible signing. But in his final 4 games sampled, his rate of snaps off the ball, 62%. His slot rate increased by 10 percentage point. And in those games, he was really cooking against zone coverage in particular, which is what you want as a slot receiver. And he was flat out one of the better contested catch receivers and after catch receivers in the RP database from last season, no question about it. So I think he's a good player. I think his role looks like it should be pretty solid in this offense. So I kind of want to take shots on both him and Brian Thomas Jr. because I'm generally kind of willing to give Brian Thomas Jr. a pass for some of the stuff last season. There are areas where he needs to improve, but he clearly wasn't healthy last year. So I like taking my shots on both those guys because I think they're probably the favorites to, if you're going to hit a home run, it's going to be one of those 2 guys. But ultimately, I do kind of think the base case is that all 4 of these guys play, and you're kind of irritated in fantasy on a pretty consistent basis.
100%. I do think it's notable that Travis Hunter has been practicing on the outside a lot at training camp so far. In other words, when Travis Hunter comes on the field, if he's not taking away the slot snaps from Parker Washington, that makes me feel a little bit better about Parker Washington's role there. Evan, anything to add on Jags wide receivers?
I have not personally taken a big stand on any of the Jaguars pass catchers because, and Harmon hit on it a little bit, they have so many different guys that they can use, including their tight ends. I mean, right before training camp, they gave Brenton Strange a big extension. Mm-hmm. They drafted Nate Borkircher in the 2nd round, and they got 4 receivers that they can play. And so I think it's tough to really take a stand, like a hard-line stance on any of these guys. And I think that on a week-to-week basis and season-long, it's going to be rough. You're going to be playing a lot of whack-a-mole, you know, trying to figure out who's going to score on a week-to-week basis. Is going to be pretty difficult to predict. So that's where I'm at. That's why I haven't taken a big stand on any individual Jaguars pass catcher.
We do have, in the ETR ranks, we do have Parker Washington as our highest ranked Jaguars receiver. We have Brian Thomas literally like right behind him, very close between those 2. They're both kind of
exactly how I have it too.
Yeah, I have it the other way where I have these guys close, and I just have, right now I have Brian Thomas Jr. ahead, but the Travis Hunter taking snaps at X receiver has made me like maybe rethink that a little bit, just because for a minute I thought, again, if somebody's going to be on the field all the time, to use the Packers analogy, it's going to be whoever is Romeo Doubs in this scenario because he's the outside on-ball receiver, which theoretically would be Brian Thomas Jr. But if that's not going to be the case, like I actually do kind of think, hey, if you're trying to give Travis Hunter a limited menu, when you get into, like, say they run some 13 personnel this year, which I don't think anybody will live in as much as maybe, was kind of a media talking point for a while, but let's say they do. That's a very limited route tree. You don't have to learn a ton of stuff. And if you're just Travis Hunter, go cook down the football field. It would make sense to leave him as the only receiver in those situations. So yeah, I have it pretty close too. And I'm rethinking, do I want to have BTJ or Parker Washington ranked ahead? I'm not 100% convicted there.
All right, let's go to Indy here for another guy in a new role. It's Alec Pierce. I want to ignore the injury stuff on Alec Pierce for a second here and just focus on, they paid him $84 million guaranteed. In theory, when I see that kind of bag, I think you are expected to now win at all three levels, or at least two levels. Historically, and Matt can correct me if I'm wrong, it feels more to me like Alec Pierce has won mostly deep down the field. With Michael Pittman gone, in theory, they need him to win, and they're paying this much money. In theory, they need him to win closer to the line of scrimmage. Is Alec Pierce capable of doing that here, Harmon? And what do you think about him in, I guess, theoretically, an alpha role this year?
Yeah, I guess alpha, kind of depending on your perspective of what that means. I think Pierce, no doubt, has improved a lot from where he was early in his career, when he was more of a pure sacrificial X receiver, where he's just running the downfield stuff and clearing out space for his teammates. Last year, he really improved on intermediate in-breaking routes. So he ran a dig route on 24% of his charted routes, 82% success rate, really solid number there. Was pretty good on outbreakers, but generally still better breaking over the middle of the field, which is what the Colts kind of want to do with that outside man coverage beating X receiver. So I still think his role will be, even when he's healthy or whatever, will still be like a limited menu, but it's definitely not just shot play stuff. He can run slants, he can run some in breakers, but I still think it will always be a little bit of a high wire act, because my question more with him is not so much can he run more routes than just go routes or whatever. He definitely can. I think he proved that to us last year, and he was a prospect that I kind of liked too on some of those in breakers as well. It's, can he play anything other than X receiver? Like, is he twitchy enough to move off ball or kick into the slot? And I think that the answer to that is probably no. So I think he will be like a limited menu player. And I honestly do kind of worry about him being like a $30+ million receiver. It's good that he's with the Colts instead of going to some other team or whatever. But yeah, I think Pierce is good at what he does, really, really good at what he does. But I don't know that the depth of talent is there in this one thing. Maybe not the breadth of talent is there for him.
We have Josh Downs actually projected for more targets than Alec Pierce in the ETR stuff. We do have Pierce ranked higher just for longer ADOT, more touchdown equity, etc.
For an update on Alec Pierce, Shane Steichen spoke today, and like Alec Pierce still has no timetable for return.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not feeling great about his health right now. What do you think about Josh Downs' ability to handle, the majority of the receiving workload for Indianapolis, Matt?
I love Josh Downs. I've been a longtime fan of his. I think he compares more to Tyler Lockett than, your typical slot only bunny hop type receiver. He's somebody that has been a really, really good press man beater, even in the NFL. And I get most of that's come from the slot. So, that is a piece of context there. But at this point, like, Shane Steichen, who I don't think is an idiot, would have to be an idiot to not have like Josh Downs be on the field all the time relative to some of those other players. Yeah. But yeah, I'm a big Downs fan. I think he can handle it. It's from a skill set perspective, it's just an injury based thing. And I'm at this point after the JSN season, which I'm sure we talked about this last year. My big theory for why JSN could, no question, kick outside was we've seen him be able to beat man coverage. Like, that's what you need to do if you're going to be that guy. And that was, the proof was in the pudding there for him. And obviously he had this great season. I don't know that, I'm not saying Josh Downs is going to have JSN's season, but for me personally, these teams feel differently. But for me personally, I don't want to put these artificial limits on players that they have to play in the slot just because of size or history or whatever, because I've seen Josh Downs be able to project to that type of role.
Okay, well, that is a good transition to the next spot we're going to talk about, which is Packers wide receiver room. New roles here as they get rid of Romeo Doubs and Dontavian Wicks. I want to ask about Matthew Golden, but the reason I think it's transition is because Josh Downs and Jayden Reed have historically kind of had this similar thing where we think they're awesome players, or we know they're awesome players, but their teams view them as slot only. We do know that Matthew Golden is going to play X for this Packers team, the Dobbs role that has historically been, like Matt already said, a voluminous role in terms of routes at a minimum. So, Matt, what do you think about Matthew Golden in the Dobbs role?
Yeah, I just come away from Matthew Golden's season as a rookie and not feeling strong one way or another. We talked about Quentin Johnston's rookie season. It certainly, from a reception perception perspective, was not that bad, but it also wasn't to a level, he's 33rd percentile success rate versus man coverage, 23rd percentile against zone. So nothing so much where I was I can't believe they didn't get this guy the football more, or anything like that. I thought he was, and I think if you're being fair to Matthew Golden, they tried to kick him into Jayden Reed's slot-based role, which isn't a really good fit for him because he's mostly a vertical route runner who isn't always right and tight on the details of he needs to break at this depth or whatever. So I actually do kind of think he makes sense relative to this receiver room to be the X receiver, because I don't want to see Christian Watson play X. Watson is best when you get him off ball and on the move, and I was kind of worried he would get typecasted as the X because he's the biggest guy. So honestly, I've joked about this now. I think my term sacrificial X has jumped the shark in certain perspectives. I see people be oh, it's X, he's playing X, that's not good. No, you need to have a really good X receiver. It matters a lot, and it's not a bad thing.
There are different types of X receivers, right?
Correct. Not every X is sacrificial, and not every sacrificial player is an X.
Mike Evans is not going to be a sacrificial X.
Correct. Mike Evans is going to be the most badass player in your passing game. So, it's not always a bad thing. And but Romeo Dobbs was the player who actually was the first one to make me come up with the term sacrificial X, because he needed to be the outside on-ball guy and run vertical routes so you could do all the fun stuff with Christian Watson and Jayden Reed. And I kind of think that Matthew Golden could be a little bit sacrificial, but still really good and explosive on limited opportunities as the X receiver. But I do think Reed is somebody I'm going to continue to hold out hope can play more. And I kind of think it doesn't really matter about the two receiver stuff as much this year, because I think the defense is going to be worse. I think the run game is going to be worse. And once again, I don't think that their second tight end with Luke Musgrave, especially dealing with a neck injury right now, is a better player than Jayden Reed. So to me, Reed is someone who in his first two seasons was right around 73% success rate versus man. I would like to see him play more, but he is certainly someone that is a leading candidate for, the Matt Harmon Fell for It Again award in terms of small man coverage beating slot receiver that just is a little more limited than I'd like.
We have big changes coming for the Packers. Matt alluded to some of them, but they're all good for the receivers. I mean, way more condensed, way more concentrated in terms of routes. They cannot play all these guys. Everybody else is trying to go to more heavy, more double tight end. They don't have the tight end room really to do that. We already alluded to the Luke Musgrave injury here. And then defense could be bad. Run game could be bad, And so there's just a lot of reasons to be excited about Packers stuff. The last reason to be excited about it, Matthew Golden is free in season long. I'm looking at an ADP here of 150 on Matthew Golden. Even in best ball, sometimes Matthew Golden sneaks through to 115, 120. Jayden Reed still goes in the 90s or so. And I make all three plays. I make the Watson play, the Reed play, and the Golden play here right now. Last guys to talk about for new roles is going to be the Cardinals wide receivers. Marvin Harrison, I've been calling him Mazda instead of Maserati Marv. It's really tough because Michael Wilson played so well when Mazda was out last year. First game Mazda gets back, immediately Mazda mogged him in targets. And that keeps sticking in my craw when I want to get higher Michael Wilson. So Harmon, there's a lot of debate out there about Marvin Harrison. I had stone zero Marvin Harrison last year. Shout out to me. It didn't actually lead to any significant dollars. But anyways.
Adam thinks that Marvin Harrison was never actually good. And that it was a conspiracy that because his father is Marvin Harrison Sr., Marvin Harrison Jr. was actually never good. It was all a lie.
Evan has used the phrase Nepo baby a lot on here, and this is the poster child of Nepo baby in Marvin. No, when he was going in round 3, it was easy fade last year. Now he's going in round 8 or round 9. It's a different story for sure. So Harmon, what do you think? Is Marvin Harrison actually Mazda or is he Maserati?
Okay, so we've been making good time on this episode, and I could talk for like 30 minutes about these Cardinals receivers. So I probably shouldn't have even recommended them to be on the show, because I find that this is like my painful curiosity of the year, mostly because, well, one, just on Marvin Harrison, I think you can hold two thoughts in your head, which is, one, Marvin Harrison has objectively been like disappointing relative to the expectations with which he came into the league as the 4th overall pick, even before you do all the generational prospect or his dad's name or whatever. I think that's objectively true. But I also think he has not been nearly as bad as like the internet just loves to slam on this guy, viral videos of him dropping training camp. I think he's been a perfectly solid to good NFL receiver that just was not a fit for his former quarterback. I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr.'s best stuff is like running dig routes over the intermediate middle of the field, which Kyler Murray just does not access that area. And at the same time, like Drew Petzing, offensive coordinator, I think also gets a little bit too much crap at times. Like his offense is like kind of a perfectly fine old school NFL offense. But the thing that drove me crazy about that team, and this brings me to Michael Wilson, is that Michael Wilson, I literally wrote this at the end of his rookie season charting profile. I said, because Michael Wilson showed as a rookie, he could, I'm paraphrasing myself here, which is always good stuff. Because Michael Wilson showed at the end of his rookie season, he could beat press man coverage and win as an X receiver. They don't have to just run Marvin Harrison Jr. out as the X, and they can mix it up. And then that's exactly what they did until Marvin Harrison got hurt. And then they and Michael Wilson himself has said this, which I found vindicating for myself, Adam, that Michael Wilson's like, well, yeah, and then I moved into the X, and that's where the targets go in this offense. They go to the X receiver and they go to the tight end, and they don't really go to the Z receiver where Michael Wilson was playing. All that stuff doesn't really matter, I think, now, because I do really like Mike LaFleur as an offensive play designer. I thought his offenses in New York were pretty well designed, moved the receivers around well. I just think the system here is going to fit both of these guys. Like, I think this isn't always the best analysis, but I'm going to do it anyways. If you just map like what Michael Wilson does well onto like, Puka Nacua as the Z receiver, and then you map like Davante Adams last year wasn't running a lot of vertical routes at all. And Marvin Harrison Jr. in that route tree makes a lot of sense in this offense. I realize we also don't have Matthew Stafford coming over here, obviously, but nevertheless, like I think these two receivers are both really good players. And, we get situations wrong all the time. I know this situation doesn't look good on paper, but if we're wrong about how bad this offense is going to be, like I think both of these guys are misunderstood as talents. Like Michael Wilson's a legit good player. I think Marvin Harrison Jr., again, based on his charting metrics, like this guy gets open. He's just not this overwhelming athlete or Jamar Chase or something like that. He's more of like a supersized DeVonta Smith is kind of like what I would say for him, or even like a Chris Olave type.
Yeah, Harmon has actually been one of the optimists about the Cardinals offense this year a little bit. So is Greg Rosenthal, the old boss.
I wonder if Greg Rosenthal has poisoned his Twitter algorithm like I have. I'm just like getting fed Cardinals stuff all day because I can't stop talking about them.
I mean, one thing about their schedule, which is extremely hard, that in theory can help the pass catching from a accumulation perspective. I do not think that LaFleur is going to allow Jacoby Brissett to drop back 40, 45, 50 times a game like the previous staff did. And so when you start regressing that stuff, it's harder from a projection basis. We do have Marvin Harrison pretty clear of Michael Wilson, mainly in part because of what I said before about when they were on the field together. Marvin Harrison was earning targets at a much higher rate than Michael Wilson. But Harmon's point on where they were aligned is certainly well taken. The market has these guys pretty close. Season-long ADP, Marvin Harrison 78, Michael Wilson 87. So pretty tight there on the
I have it closer like that too. And this is just one of those situations where I think like targets are earned is a generally directionally accurate phrase, but I do think like this is where it kind of falls apart, because I don't think Michael Wilson did anything different to earn targets when Marvin Harrison Jr. was out, or not earn targets when he wasn't there, or when he was there, excuse me. And I just think it's more just how the offense flows. And again, both these guys are good players to me.
All right. Let's move to the next section here. It's going to be year 2 wide receivers. Man, there is some hateful stuff going on out there between the Luther Burden truthers and the Luther Burden haters. I mean, these people are really going at it. Luther Burden did not get to play until the end of last year. When he played at the end of last year, from an underlying metric perspective, it was one of the more impressive rookie wide receiver seasons that you can remember. The hater's going to say it's a tiny sample, yada, yada, yada. Harmon, what say you about how good Luther Burden actually is?
Yeah, I think Luther Burden's really good, man. Like, and it's totally predictable that he did not get a full-time role last year. Number one, because he got hurt in the, training camp or like before training camp process for a rookie receiver in Ben Johnson's offense. Like, that was very predictable that he was going to need a slow ramp up, because Luther Burden was also a guy that kind of had to be not completely torn down and built back up, but he was somebody that needed to be pushed. He needed to be coached hard, and it was kind of predictable that he didn't play a lot at the beginning of the year. But 71% success rate versus man, 80.4% success rate versus zone. Like, those are the benchmarks we want to see a good wide receiver clear, especially in a part-time role. Like, this guy was drafted to replace DJ Moore in the offense, because DJ Moore did not fit this offense, even though he's still a pretty quality player. And I know we'll talk about him a little bit later, but Luther Burden does fit the offense, especially now that he's been in the system for a while, both in terms of getting the yards after catch. And I am a Dunze optimist, and I refuse to participate in the culture war of you've got to hate one to love the other. I don't ascribe to that, because I do really like Luther Burden, but he's objectively better with the ball in his hands, no question about it, than Rome Odunze is. And even so, like, the way they used DJ Moore last year, they would get him screens and they would get him these like big outbreaking routes, and it wasn't always successful with Caleb Williams. Luther Burden, 84.6% success rate on digs, 73% success rate on out routes, pretty solid on post routes. That's a lot of what they wanted DJ Moore to do, and he just wasn't a really good fit with that. So I think Luther Burden is kind of aggressively priced based on his final stats last year, but I don't really care about that. I care about an ascending player in what I think is going to be one of the three best offenses this year. And yeah, to me, I feel really good about where Luther Burden is right now.
Oh, yeah, dude.
I was not aware that Luther Burden had haters.
Oh,
yes. But if they really exist, I mean, that's a big yikes. Like, Luther Burden is a baller. This is an incredible situation that he's found himself in. Ben Johnson talking about him like, he could become one of the best receivers in the league. There were like legit analysts who thought he was the best receiver in the 2025 draft, which I think was largely borne out on the field. The Bears defense is going to be a big problem this year.
Yes.
I mean, they're going to have to score points to be competitive. There's no way that they can duplicate that crazy turnover differential that they had last year. Brandon Thorne had him, the 31st ranked pass rush. They lose Kobe Bryant in the first week of training camp. They're going to have a rookie Dylan Thieneman at safety and some scrub opposite him. Like, this defense is going to give up a lot of points, a lot of big plays. And the Bears offense is going to have to respond. I think they will respond.
They will.
Luther Burden will be one of the leading characters in that.
Yeah. Luther Burden's going to smash, man. I mean, like the DJ Moore thing, the guy in the room, I mean, the guys that Ben Johnson identified as guys that he wanted were Colson Loveland and Luther Burden. He inherited DJ Moore and Rome Odunze. DJ Moore is gone, and Rome Odunze's dad is like fighting with Caleb Williams. You know what I mean? It's like this is Colson Loveland and Luther Burden. Okay, I'm excited about it. I know we'll talk more about Rome here.
Yeah, I'm gonna disagree with that later on, but we'll come back to it.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. All right. Other year two guy that I think is a really interesting profile, Emeka Egbuka. I took a bunch of Emeka Egbuka last year, and he came out of the gates. I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be absolutely incredible. Then he gets banged up. Baker gets banged up, and it's kind of a struggle down the stretch for Egbuka. Now he gets the run out with Mike Evans gone, though, here. And we could have done this in new roles, but he is a year two wide receiver. How capable, Harmon, do you think Egbuka is of filling those Mike Evans-esque kind of shoes?
Well, the good news is that Emeka Egbuka is no longer going to actually play in Mike Evans' spot, because that's essentially what he had to do last year, where Egbuka was coming into the NFL, and I had him, just in terms of my rankings for the prospects coming into the draft that year. I had Travis Hunter as kind of his own thing. Like, if he theoretically played wide receiver, like, I think he could have been the best in the class, but he's not going to ever play full-time wide receiver. He's going to play both ways. Then it was Tetairoa McMillan, and then Emeka Egbuka, and then Luther Burden, Matthew Golden, kind of the next guy up there. So I really liked Egbuka as a prospect, but he was a big slot kind of Z receiver player. And then last year, because Mike Evans missed so much time, Egbuka ends up taking 68.6% of his sampled snaps outside and was on the line of scrimmage for 64%. And those numbers went up when Evans was not on the field. So, I mean, for Egbuka, like, he was mostly an outside X receiver, which just doesn't make any sense for his kind of profile. And that, in combination with Baker's injury, Ibuka's own injury, I think is what kind of derailed his rookie season when it was off to a really promising start. So, yeah, I think Ibuka's really well set up to be kind of that Z receiver in this offense, as Zach Robinson talked about. And, Robinson, you could definitely make some qualms about his offenses at times in Atlanta, but I think he's objectively really good for receiver usage. I mean, the 2024 Falcons, all of their main pass catchers were in the slot on over 39% of their passing plays. And I think Egbuka being that movement Z receiver, yeah, I think he could absolutely, like, totally smash if Baker's good this year, because he's somebody who, where I have questions about, like, Lad McConkey, these guys like having 140 like Egbuka can handle a lot of targets and fits this offense extremely, extremely well.
This is another one, Evan, that goes in the 40s. And a lot of the receivers we've talked about that we like keep going in the 40s. ADP here on Egbuka is 42 overall right now. So, yeah.
There's just a lot of context that we have to consider for the way, the progression of Emeka Egbuka's rookie year, because he dealt with a hamstring injury. Baker was talking about recently all the injuries that he played through. I mean, his entire body was banged up. Remember, the offensive line fell apart in Tampa Bay last year, and, like, they're getting all those guys back. Thorne has the Bucs as the number 3 offensive line in the league, I believe.
Yes.
So the context around Emeka Egbuka is a lot more positive entering this season than the way that it progressed over the course of his rookie year. How comparable, because, obviously they both played at Ohio State, first-round picks, sort of later first-round picks. They had similar, like, scouting reports coming out of college, Emeka Egbuka and Jackson Smith-Njigba. Do you think that Emeka Egbuka can be like 95% of Jackson Smith-Njigba? I mean, that's a big ask after what JSN did last year. I mean, he was like the best, one of the best offensive players in the league. But I mean, how similar do you think that they are?
Yeah, I think that JSN's just shown more against, like, press coverage and release moves off the line of scrimmage, is why he was actually able to handle a primary outside on-ball receiver role last year for the Seahawks. Whereas I think Egbuka, you need to get in motion off the line of scrimmage, which again is how I think he'll be used this year. But certainly, like, from a prospect profile perspective, I kind of had these guys with similar rankings in my stacked rankings on the site.
I mean, Jaylen McMillan, who I think is going to be the X to start, but he's not a natural X either. And that's where you get this Ted Hurst talk coming from, where maybe Ted Hurst could play the X to keep Egbuka in Z. But yeah, it's super interesting for sure. I hope McMillan can actually play the X, I guess, for Egbuka's sake there. All right. Let's go to Tetairoa McMillan. I feel like this is a hard evaluation, Harmon, because Bryce Young has just been so bad. And I know he's had moments. I know in the playoff game, he went off, but gosh, if you look at Bryce Young's career as a whole, it has not been good for wide receivers. And I felt like last year, a lot of times, Panthers coaches were trying to hide Bryce. Let's see how many times we can run it. Let's see how slow we can play. And obviously that is not good for wide receiver production. But in terms of Tetairoa McMillan just winning, it felt to me like he was a hit for the Panthers in a pretty big way. Harmon, what do you think about Tetairoa McMillan as an NFL wide receiver going into year 2?
Yeah, I mean, no question a hit. 70th percentile success rate versus press as a rookie, 72nd versus man coverage. The routes that he runs the best to me are kind of those intermediate breaking routes. I mean, I asked him this in February at the Super Bowl, like, what's your favorite route to run? He said he loves running dig routes. He had a 91.5% success rate on dig routes. So good call, Tetairoa McMillan, on your best route. You got that one right based on the charting. So, yeah, I mean, and that all translates, by the way, to him playing, more in the slot, which I know they've talked about. The Chris Brazzell injury makes that a little more complicated, because I think he would have been a perfect sacrificial vertical receiver, and Dave Canales even talked about him as like a field stretcher to open things up for teammates. But Jalen Coker being like a true stud and somebody that can actually play X receiver as well matters a lot for McMillan moving around, because I think some of those routes, like, he basically had the same rookie season from an alignment perspective as like Marvin Harrison, when everybody's complaining about him as a X only option as a rookie. That's what Tetairoa McMillan had to do, and he was better, from a production standpoint for sure than Marvin Harrison Jr. So yeah, I think McMillan is clearly a good player. No question about that. It's just about the environment overall for him in fantasy.
Yeah, and I mean, we're a little bit behind season-long ADP here for that reason. Season-long ADP is 38 overall on McMillan. We're at 45 overall, and that really has nothing to do with him as a player. It's all the Bryce stuff and the environment stuff there being a little bit behind market on Tet.
I do think Brazel being hurt in a weird way also, though, like if they're still intent on him playing in the slot, just like fewer targets there, because I think Leggett, who also got hurt, I mean, the Panthers have had a disastrous start to camp injury-wise, but like Leggett got hurt today. It pretty much is just like you're throwing the ball to McMillan and throwing it to Coker, and I mean, those two guys are both really good, but just how good is Bryce Young? That's the question.
Does not look good for Bryce Young.
And also that tackle situation. I mean, the Panthers are going to open the season without both of their starting offensive tackles.
Yep.
And, you know, we know that Dave Canales wants to play run first, and then you add in the Bryce. Tet McMillan, to me, is like one of the toughest dudes to rank this year because, look, all three of us believe in his talent, right? But the environment is just not ideal.
Yep. And I think like at the tails, you know, that's where that stuff comes into play. Like, you know, like how many yards, how many touchdowns can teams score plays into how often guys hit their 90th, 95th percentile outcome. Okay, last one on year 2 here, Harmon. A little bit more downboard for people in deeper leagues. Jayden Higgins is expected to play opposite Nico Collins. I think we've talked before about how they're just like really similar. And I don't know if you agree, Harmon, but like Nico and Jayden Higgins feel like very, very similar players-ish to me, but I do expect them to be out there in 2 wide receiver sets. What's your outlook on Jayden Higgins coming into year 2?
Yeah, Higgins was somebody that I was a little skeptical on as a prospect because I thought he looks like Nico Collins, but he doesn't play like Nico Collins, where Nico's an unbelievable player, like top 5 NFL receiver, can beat press man coverage as an X receiver. And I just thought Jayden Higgins didn't have that same vertical ability to be a true X receiver in the league, which I think did bear out in his rookie season. But when he got snaps as the Z receiver, I think his fluidity made a lot more sense there, especially on out cuts and like bigger post routes. And from the sound of it this year, I think Nico, as much as it would be cool to see him play fewer snaps at X because he basically only lines up there, I don't think, based on what I've heard, that that's going to happen. I think Nico's going to stay at the X receiver position, and Higgins might actually, you know, like Xavier Hutchinson might play more than people want, and yes, Higgins might end up being the slot in that situation because Jalen Noel hasn't been healthy, and we'll see about Tank Dell. I still love Jalen Noel. I think he's a really, really good deep sleeper and someone that impressed me in his charting as a rookie. But Higgins is a guy just, I don't see a lot of people talking about Higgins. Maybe it's because CJ Stroud was so bad to end the year, but Stroud was a top 10 quarterback by EPA per play last year. I think is a little bit better than maybe the kind of lowest moments. And it just, Higgins, again, fits so much better. He's one of these guys that just, when you look at him as an X, you know, against vertical routes against press man coverage, doesn't look great. But if you can get him off ball, like in the right role, I think he could be a really productive player that kind of outkicks the expectations when, like I said, I just don't see anybody talking about him right now.
Yeah. I think one of the issues is, you know, what is the ceiling for a number 2 receiver on a team with somewhat shaky quarterback play that is built on its defense, like one of the most, you know, probably the most talented defense in the NFL, and they just acquired like a big-time bell cow running back, or at least a guy that they envision as a big-time bell cow running back in David Montgomery. They're going to run the ball a lot. They're going to play really good defense. They're going to play in low-scoring games probably, and Jayden Higgins is the number 2 receiver. You know, it's almost like he needs Nico Collins to get hurt really to offer a ceiling statistically.
Yeah, it's one of the rare wide receivers. Jayden Higgins actually goes later in best ball than season long, which is, you know, surprising to me. But yeah, you know, 100 overall in season long is probably going to be a pass for me, but closer to 130 or so I think is more interesting on Jayden Higgins there. And I agree with Harmon. Like, I haven't really thought about Jayden Higgins very much, and I haven't seen anyone else really talking about.
I'll take him in best ball a decent amount.
Yeah.
He did score 6 touchdowns on 68 targets last year. I mean, he's a big dude. Should be able to win in the red zone.
All right, let's go to our next section here, Harmon, which is aging veterans. Want to start with Davante Adams, who will turn 34 years old in December. Wide receiver position is not like tight end. There is often pretty severe age cliffs, even for the best guys around 31, 32. So we're really starting to push it here on Davante Adams. I think everybody knows the story, what happened last year. Supported by effectively a goal line roll. They would get inside the 5-yard line, and the play so often was Davante Adams one-on-one, get open on a slant or an out, and he won on that so much. Ended up with 14 touchdowns. Harmon, how sustainable is that? And do you think Davante Adams can still win in other ways beyond this goal line role?
Yeah, with all three, really the next guys we're going to talk about, we do come back to that question with aging receivers of, does it look like this, kind of a steady little decline, or do we go right off the cliff? And for Adams, I think he's kind of already mid-process of that steady decline, because he brings at least one of the two things that you need, I think, to age gracefully at the receiver position, is that he is a capital E elite technician, which is why he's still really good in those goal line situations. I mean, last season, 61st percentile success rate versus man and press coverage, which is how he made a lot of not just the touchdowns, but even the plays that he would have are kind of, like I mentioned, he doesn't run a lot of vertical routes. It's 21% of his routes were digs, 23% slants. Like, he runs a lot of those breaking routes in this offense as the X receiver. And he, based on who he was last year, can still do that. Again, the question is just what's the next step down for him? Because when I'm saying he's at 61st percentile success rate versus man and press, this is a guy who's been like 99th percentile at different points in his career. Like, clearly he's not the same player that he once was, but if he's the guy he was last year, I think he can still hang on for at least another year, but he'll be 34 years old in December. He already got banged up he did wear down at the end of last year. Like, he came back and wasn't the same player in the playoffs. So the Rams are a very interesting offense, man, because they're like walking a tightrope, right? Where if everything stays as it is right now, it's going to look pretty good, but there are some significant questions. And while I said Adams was impressive as a route runner last year and still could get open on those particular routes that he runs a lot, if there's another step of decline there, he misses more time, they do not have any depth behind him and Puka Nacua.
There were rumors, and I kind of bought them, that the Rams were in on the A.J. Brown sweepstakes. And that did not make me feel great about how they feel about Davante Adams. I mean, I remember talking about, we had this huge fade on Cooper Kupp last year. We had him ranked 5-6 rounds behind ADP, and people were freaking out. And I was just like, man, the Rams just know Cooper Kupp better than anyone. And they decided that Cooper Kupp was toast. And they were right. AJ Brown, it concerns me a little bit on Davante Adams. That said, he's going 56 overall in season long. I mean, that's pretty late for a guy that can score double-digit touchdowns, 56 overall. So, yeah, Evan, any more thoughts here on Davante Adams?
I just agree with Matt Harmon's point that it seems like the Rams offense is almost hanging by a thread. I mean, on down to, what's going to happen with their left tackle. Is he going to get suspended? Matthew Stafford is, old, had the back stuff last year, obviously made it through, it was the MVP, but can he do that again? I think that they're kind of hanging by a thread. I think Davante Adams' career feels like it's hanging by a thread right now. You need him to score a ton of touchdowns to pay off as a fantasy pick because he's not going deep anymore.
Yeah, no.
So, I mean, what did he have? He had 700 some yards last year.
Yeah.
Yep. You need him to score a ton of touchdowns. You need Matthew Stafford to almost get close to, what did he have, a 7.7% touchdown rate last year? That's probably going to regress. I don't really want Davante Adams this year.
Yeah. Like I said, 56 overall.
I want
is late.
Puka Nacua.
Well, yes. Yeah. Certainly want Puka Nacua. Yeah. Okay.
And the Rams should have drafted Makai Lemon instead of Ty Simpson.
Well, they should have drafted KC Concepcion, but we'll leave it there. We'll
right.
A little bit of a different type.
Okay. Let's go to another aging veteran. This one changed teams. AJ Brown is 29 years old now. The AJ Brown tape from last year is really tough, and I know Harmon looks at this way more than me. It seemed like at the beginning of the year, at least, AJ Brown was so frustrated, pissed. Like, he's a guy that actually, when he's not locked in mentally, plays worse, and it felt like he wasn't locked in mentally. Maybe he was better towards the end of the year. I don't know what you think about throwing out tape, Harmon, if you have this read on it or not, but where do you think AJ Brown is at in his career as he heads to New England at age 29?
So, yeah, AJ Brown's a tough one because I have made this mistake in the past where, specifically with a guy like Allen Robinson, like, I loved Allen Robinson as a player, but he had small declines in his reception perception numbers at the end of his time with the Bears, and I kind of waved those away, and I was super wrong about that because, again, he was one of the guys that just, the next step was not a graceful decline, it was right off the cliff. So I worry about that with AJ Brown because he's one of my all-time favorite receivers of this era. From 2020 to 2024, he averaged a 78.9% success rate versus man, 82.9% success rate versus press, like legit elite numbers, over 81% success rate versus zone. I mean, that's what the best receivers in the NFL, that's how they chart out. And he's been one of the best receivers in the NFL. This past year, he dips down to 69.2% success rate versus man, 73% success rate versus zone, and sub 66 against press. So declines across the board. And to your point, Adam, like if you do split the numbers up pre-buy, post-buy, because I don't really know how to quantify for sure, is he out there loafing it or whatever, but the numbers post-buy are significantly better than pre-buy when he was kind of playing through a hamstring injury coming into the offseason. And then he misses a game before the bye. Then he has the bye. He comes back. And the numbers are better in the back half, but they are still overall a slight decline from those like truly elite numbers. So the question with Brown is just, again, like what is the next step? Is it one more good year, two more good years? Because even if it just those overall numbers that he's at right now, that could be like, I don't know, DK Metcalf or something like that, which DK Metcalf is a perfectly fine starting X receiver. He's just not peak AJ Brown. And honestly, like you mentioned the Rams' pursuit of A.J. Brown, the way I've understood is that the reason they backed out of that is because they were worried about the medicals. And this is a 29-year-old receiver with a bunch of lower body injuries. In a weird way, the Rams' pursuit of A.J. Brown makes me feel worse about Davante Adams and A.J. Brown. So honestly, look, if A.J. Brown has a monster season in 2025 or 2026 with the Patriots, I just think he should be like a one round cheaper in fantasy has been my takes. I think like 0% of the risk is baked into that cost.
Yeah. I hear you for sure. One thing that I do think is that they are going to try to get AJ Brown volume. When you trade for AJ Brown, he better get volume or he is going to cause a problem. So I think they will try to get him a ton of volume. I mean, look at Steph Diggs last year. Steph Diggs only played 57% of the snaps and he went over 1,000 yards. Like I do not think volume is going to be the issue for AJ Brown. I do have some concerns about, he's expensive for a guy who is 29 with knee and hamstring issue also.
The role really is the question for him too, because he pretty much was just outside on ball last year, and his final year in Tennessee with Mike Vrabel, and actually the current receiver coach in New England was Todd Downing, was the offensive coordinator. He played a career high percentage of snaps off the line of scrimmage. And funny enough, like the Patriots receiver room, if they keep Kayshon Boutte, is Dobbs, Brown, Boutte. Those guys were all ex receivers last year. So and them moving AJ Brown around, I did a whole breakdown on this on my YouTube channel. If they do kind of have him as more of a move around player, I think that actually would help stave off some of the decline as opposed to just having him run go routes from the X receiver spot.
All right. Yeah, Evan is significantly behind market on AJ Brown here. 30th
I moved
overall.
him down a little bit recently.
Yeah, 30th overall for Silva on AJ Brown against an ADP of 22 overall.
I mean, it is tempting to be like, is Drake May the best quarterback of AJ Brown's like career?
Yeah.
I think
he is.
For sure.
And so, all right, AJ Brown is pairing up with the best quarterback of his career. Let's go all in. But I think that there were some concerns, and also, I mean, Howie Roseman traded him away. Howie Roseman, probably the smartest GM in the NFL. It's a little bit too many concerns for me to be drafting him at 22nd overall. I have him at 30.
Yep. Okay. Let's go to another interesting one here, Harmon, and that is Mike Evans, who will turn 33 years old in a couple of weeks. The substation talk just won't stop with all these injuries. And like Mike Evans is not hurt, but he tweaked his quad or whatever earlier this week. It's not going to help. I honestly think that people are afraid to draft Mike Evans because of the substation. I'm not even exaggerating. I legit think people assume he's going to get hurt. He's 33 years old and he practices next to substation. So I still thought he played pretty well last year when he was out there. We'll see what Harmon thinks, though. Mike Evans here in San Francisco. What do you think, Harmon?
Yeah, I do want to hear Evan give us a 20-minute breakdown on the substation, but we'll put a pin in that.
I want to talk about your monster water jug that you just took a swill out of.
Well, I saw you were trying to mog me with the like old plastic bottle there. So no, yeah, this is good engagement bait for you guys. Every time I take a drink out of the big jug, I get like 20 YouTube comments on it. So hopefully this helps you guys as well. But no, yeah, Mike Evans, like I think he's played really well last year too. When he was out there, he could still beat press man coverage from the X receiver position. The routes that he runs, like if you look at, I think one thing that was really misunderstood about the Niners offense last year is that they were counting on Brandon Ayuk to come back, which obviously did not work out. So they had to kind of like cobble together the X receiver position with Ricky Pearsall. Moment of silence. And then Jawan Jennings as the outside on-ball receiver. But if you look at like when they have a true X like Ayuk, they run all of the routes that Mike Evans is really still good at, like dig routes, slant routes, obviously 9 routes and out routes. Like it fits really well for him. But honestly, like the best summary I've heard about Mike Evans' outlook this year, I was on a show with Scott Barrett, and he said that his colleague Ryan Heath said, whatever happens with Mike Evans is going to feel extremely obvious in hindsight. He's either going to stay healthy for like 14 games and score double-digit touchdowns, or he's going to play 5 total games, probably 3, and this is me now editorializing it. He's going to play 3 at the start of the year, tweak his hamstring, come back for 2, and then be out for the season. And like that'll pretty much be it. So I have no idea which one of those it is, but I still thought Evans played well last year and fits the offense extremely well.
I think he's going to have a really good year if he stays healthy. And so at an ADP, a Yahoo ADP of 60, like that's a buy for me of Mike Evans at 60. Same. I'm not going to play so scared of the substation. I'm not taking Mike Evans, Kyle Shanahan's X receiver at 60 overall. Like that would be a bridge too far for me to pass on that at 60 personally.
Yeah, I'm at 50.
You talk about another offense that feels like it's hanging by a thread. That's San Francisco.
Yep.
Christian McCaffrey's old and overworked. Mike Evans is old. Ricky Pearsall is already out for the year. They just had to sign Deebo Samuel. Trent Williams is a million years old and injured. Their freaking head coach is injured. Yeah. It seems like the bottom never falls out on San Francisco because they are so well coached and designed. But yeah, I mean, we could see some major moving parts in San Francisco this year. But I'm with you guys. Like and I love to hear that Harmon thinks that Mike Evans is still playing at a high level. If everything goes right, if he stays healthy, Mike Evans is going to crush double-digit touchdowns, 1,200 yards. I'm drafting him for his ceiling. He's got big-time upside.
Yeah, we're at 53 overall in the ETR half PPR ranks there on Mike Evans. Last aging vet to talk about is DJ Moore. So it's at least somewhat scary to me that Ben Johnson wanted to get rid of this guy. We'll always have that one incredible season that DJ Moore had with Justin Fields where, I mean, that was just absolutely insane. Certainly ran really pure. I guess the question for a lot of people on DJ Moore is he good enough to consolidate targets in an offense which historically has not really consolidated targets very much outside of the Diggs years, of course. So, Harmon, what do you think about DJ Moore as Josh Allen's number 1 this season?
Yeah, I honestly don't have like a high level of conviction on DJ Moore's production and like fantasy rankings or anything like that. But I think because the toughest part about it is that even beyond like the per route stuff, which I think can be a little bit Caleb Williams induced because in his rookie year, he took a lot of sacks and throwaways and stuff like that. But, he has performed worse in reception perception, which the goal of the charting is to isolate players from surrounding variables. He has performed worse the last 2 years than in his best seasons, both, in Carolina and the first year in Chicago. Now, that being said, I think last year, if you wanted to give him a pass, he just did not fit Ben. He just doesn't fit Ben Johnson's offense in any way because Ben Johnson, the 2 things that he really wants you to do is he wants you to run dig routes and out routes and be able to play multiple positions. And he wants you to be on time. He's a very, very detailed coach. And DJ Moore, like I like DJ. I've talked to DJ a lot over the years. He's a very loosey-goosey player. Okay. Like he's not really right and tight on the details. He won't always be in the right place, the right time, the right route depth and everything like that. And particularly his 2 kind of some of his worst routes is like out routes and dig routes. So that was the routes he ran the most often. But if you look at like his route chart, and I did a breakdown on this on Twitter, if you just want to search reception perception more, you can find it. Like the routes he's still really good at are 9 routes, curl routes, slant routes, which are the routes that Joe Brady wants out of his primary X receiver. I mean, even friggin' Keon Coleman his rookie year, those are the routes that he was not running well, but the routes he was running a lot of. So you can paint a story where he fits this offense better, and he certainly fits Josh Allen much better from a quarterback perspective. I remember talking to Josh It's like a few years ago when him and Steph Diggs were cooking, and he even said, like, I've told Steph, I don't care about like the route depth or any of that. Like, just get open, and it's my job to find you. So I think that from a details perspective, it'll go a little bit better in Buffalo than it certainly did in Chicago, where he just wasn't a fit. But like I said, I based on just even still, that's kind of painting a narrative, painting a story. And there's just no question that I think he has not played as well the last 2 years than he did at his best. So it's kind of hard for me to have a lot of conviction on what he's going to do, but he will make their offense better. That I feel pretty strongly about.
This is one that we're actually behind in the ETR ranks. We're at 57 overall on DJ Moore. ADP is 52 on DJ Moore here for the Bills. All right. Last category here, Harmon, is everybody's favorite, the rookies. Want to start with Jordyn Tyson. Jordyn Tyson, I know a lot of people thought was maybe the best wide receiver in the draft. He does come off the board in the top 10, but as the second wide receiver off the board, they do not have a lot behind Olave and Tyson. There's a competition going on between Devon Vele and a bunch of dust balls for the number 3. So we are expecting Jordyn Tyson to play a ton of snaps. I mean, run a ton of routes as a rookie here. How do you think he will fare on those routes, Harmon?
Yeah, Tyson wasn't one of my top 2 receiver prospects in this class. I had a couple of guys ahead of him. He was my 4th, actually, because I was a big KC Concepcion guy. But he did have a lot of encouraging marks in his profile. 89th percentile success rate versus zone coverage. That only wasn't just the best in this year's class. That was the best, like one of the top 4 marks since 2021. So he's up there with some really promising receivers, including like Garrett Wilson and Drake London and Travis Hunter, Jahan Dotson too. So you can obviously scroll past that name. But anyways, yeah, Jordyn Tyson though, he's good at certain things, but he's not, to me, like his release moves against press need some work. His like routes against man coverage are a little too over exaggerated, overrun at times. That being said, for a guy that is his size, beats zone coverage, is really fluid, him landing in New Orleans was like the perfect spot for him, because Kellen Moore, I really like the way that offense is designed, especially with how much pre-snap motion there is. And they get like everybody snaps from the slot and off ball. You can honestly like paint a pretty good picture about how Chris Olave is kind of their top outside man coverage beating receiver. And yeah, Tyson's going to be that zone beater and eat up a ton of targets in the intermediate area, where Tyler Shuck was great throwing the football. So I obviously some red flags in Tyson's profile. I wouldn't say he was a totally clean prospect, but landed in the perfect spot for him to have a lot of both immediate and long-term success.
Yeah, and this is one that I think is one of the better wide receiver picks on the board relative to ADP. I know Silva's in on Jordyn Tyson here also.
Huge in on.
All right, let's get to maybe a tougher one here, Harmon. Carnell Tate gets this absurd draft capital. Titans surprisingly take him at 4 overall. The college production was not great, and that's always like, I don't want to say a flag, but okay, he played with Jeremiah Smith. It doesn't excuse like never or rarely having really big games and sustained production, I think. So I don't know, Harmon. Then he lands with the Titans, who, Wandale is there and Ridley is there also. So, Harmon, what do you think about Carnell Tate's ability to have a year 1 impact here with the Titans?
Yeah, I like Tate. He was my number 1 prospect in the class just because I think, really has a high floor. He can win outside. He can win against man coverage. He can win on like the straight line vertical routes, which in Brian Daboll's kind of spread and shred offense with Cam Ward as the quarterback, if Cam Ward can improve, which low bar, he was statistically one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL last year. Like, that's a good spot for Carnell Tate. Like the routes that Cam Ward's going to throw well, Carnell Tate runs those routes really well. However, I do think there's a lot of outcomes where like Wan'Dale Robinson leads this team in catches, because Robinson took a big step last year as an individual player. He knows Daboll's system, and he's going to get like all the easy button targets. And that's a thing for Tate, that he got basically no easy button targets last year, which I think is part of the context with the collegiate profile. Like no screens, very few quick outs or slants. It's all just old school downfield receiver stuff. And I look at this receiver room in Tennessee right now, and especially again in Brian Daboll's offense, like this is not Malik Neighbors coming in here. Like Neighbors was a way better prospect, and I like Tate, but Malik Neighbors is a way better prospect and can like move around the formation, get all the easy button targets. That is probably not going to happen with Carnell Tate. So it's funny, when we came into redraft season originally, I was like, I'm going to have Tate as the number one rookie receiver. And right now I still kind of do, but I do think Tyson's a guy I need to get a little higher on, because I just think that offense is much better designed and fits his skills to a pretty good degree.
Yeah, I've been taking Tyson ahead of Tate, and one of the reasons is what Harmon said. Like, if Calvin Ridley's best in the intermediate and Wan'Dale Robinson's the best in the short, there's a lot of value. We just saw Alec Pierce get $84 million. There's a lot of value these NFL teams think of a guy that goes deep and and can win. And like, so yeah, it's just tougher for me on Tate. So I do take Tyson ahead of Tate here for redraft personally. We mentioned Makai Lemon a little bit when we talked about DeVonta Smith. I think the direct question, Harmon, is if the Eagles are going to play a lot of two wide receiver sets, is Makai Lemon going to be pinned as this Jayden Reed, Josh Downs, early career type stuff where he is slot only? Or do you think the Eagles are willing and able to play Makai Lemon on the outside opposite DeVonta Smith?
I generally think like teams would be kind of crazy, and the Eagles are a smart team to pay that kind of draft capital and then kind of pigeonhole them into that role. And I also think there's a lot of indicators in Makai Lemon's profile that he can do more than just play in the slot. I think he can at least be a Z in two receiver sets. And Sean Mannion coming from this Packers offense, like one of the things they did really well, and they just unfortunately did this a lot with Dontavian Wicks, who's on the Eagles roster, where they would use him as the Z in two receiver sets and motion him into the slot and run these out cuts. And that's if you look at Makai Lemon's route tree, his outbreaking routes at both depths of the flats and outs are some of his best routes. I actually think that's a good thing for people who are concerned about Makai Lemon fitting with Jalen Hurts and the over the middle stuff. Some of Makai Lemon's best stuff is like breaking routes outside the numbers. So I think that like marriage with Jalen Hurts in this new offense will be fine. Just a question of how much time can he get ramping up to the season. He's dealt with a hamstring injury in OTAs. He's dealing with a hamstring injury right now. And as I said with Luther Burden, like I hate when a rookie receiver misses any time in the offseason, because it's just like these are very, very valuable ramp up reps, and Lemon is not getting them right now. And like Wicks is definitely one of those guys that I like still have a candle lit for. I'm not saying he's going to have a big breakout season, but I think he can still be a useful NFL player.
Yeah. Lemon goes late, Evan. I mean, Lemon goes 95 overall. And we're even been a little bit behind market on that. It's a scary fade to me just because it's, like Harmon said, it's a good organization. Makai Lemon is a good player. And I do think that Jalen Hurts has been like somewhat unfairly maligned for not being able to support wide receivers. So it's a scary fade for me, but we do have a fade right now on Makai Lemon in the ranks for what it's worth.
One of my concerns this year is that the Eagles turn into like a fairly low scoring defense oriented team. And they use a bunch of multiple tight end sets, and they feed Saquon, and Dontavian Wicks is sort of rotating with Makai Lemon opposite DeVonta Smith, who is the alpha in the passing game. And there's just not a whole lot there for Makai Lemon to chew off. So I don't know. But I mean, in terms of like bet on talent, he's a bet on talent pick. No question. I mean, I know that Adam has been more optimistic about his fantasy outlook in year one than I have.
Yep. Last rookie is one that we weren't going to talk about until the substation hit, and that is Dejon Stribling. The substation got Pearsall. Christian Kirk is also on the sideline right now, and so everybody is talking about Stribling as their favorite quote-unquote sleeper. It's an interesting one to me, Harmon, because the prospect bros hated Stribling so much, and if you listen to the reports, the NFL loved Stribling so much. He ends up going 33 overall, right down the prospect bros esophagus. So, Harmon, what do you think about Stribling here, who is now ticketed for what looks like a pretty big role for the 49ers?
I mean, the substation kind of got him too, right? Like he's got a little bit of a hamstring thing. So, I mean, the substation is in midseason form. So there is that. But no, I liked Stribling. We posted a video a couple days before the draft where I said like he was my favorite day two sleeper. It's our most viewed YouTube video of all time. So shout out to DeVonta Stribling, just a content machine. But he goes even higher than I had him ranked as a day two prospect. He goes obviously 33rd overall. And the reason is that like this guy is just a total coach's favorite. This is what happens when guys get boosted up late in the process. It's because that the coaches have all finally started watching prospects, and this guy is just total coach's catnip, especially this offensive system, because one, he's a great blocker in the run game. He catches everything, and he's really good with the ball in his hands. Like, this guy breaks tackles, but his overall route tree, like, there's a lot of red in it, but you kind of need to give that some context, because he's not going to run a ton of 9 routes and he did run a ton of 9 routes at Ole Miss, but the 2 routes he's really good on are like routes breaking over the middle of the field, dig routes and slant routes. And that's what this offense wants from its receivers. So, I mean, I think he could be like a Juwan Jennings plus type of player, because he's way more athletic than Juwan Jennings, but he has the same like toughness. He breaks his routes off well. I think he could play Z. I think he could play slot, and I think he can dabble at the X receiver position if Mike Evans were to ever get hurt. So yeah, I like Stribling. I don't think he's some kind of just joke. And I think he's like a legit player.
Yeah. I mean, in my head, he's just like a much more athletic and better version of Juwan Jennings. And Juwan Jennings had some very productive fantasy seasons. And the other thing I talked about on Market Monday was you get the fragility on the other guys. Like, we talk about the injury risk to Kittle, to Mike Evans, to CMC. All that stuff would be good for Stribling also there. So yeah, I think he's a good pick for sure. I mean, he's been going way too late lately. That's for sure.
Just to underline the athleticism advantage that Dezwan Stribling brings to the table over Juwan Jennings. Dezwan Stribling ran 4.36 coming out. Juwan Jennings ran 4.72. So they're kind of on a different planet from a speed standpoint.
For sure. All right. We now will give the floor to Matt Harmon. Let's start with your 2 most underrated wide receivers in the NFL. We're not talking fantasy here, I don't think, Harmon. I think we want to do this under the terms of just real life NFL 2 most underrated wide receivers in your head. Let's just do one first, and we can talk about it, and then we'll go to the other one.
Yeah, one guy we already touched on was Josh Downs. And I mean, to be clear, I am drafting both of the guys I'm going to talk about here in underrated players in fantasy, because I think they're going way too late. But Josh Downs in particular, like, there's just no reason why this guy, I think, other than health, can't handle 120 targets and be the leading receiver on the Colts this year. He beats man coverage at all 3 levels. Like I said, a Tyler Lockett type of player. Honestly, he's been a good NFL player. When he's been on the field, he's been a useful, productive player for the Indianapolis Colts. This hasn't had quite a big role yet. I think this is the year he gets a big role, and just like, this is the Josh Downs season to me.
Okay. Yep. We hit on that one. I totally agree. I think we all are in on Josh Downs this year. Let's go to your second most underrated wide receiver in the NFL.
Yeah, this one's Rome Odunze to me. And I really like Rome Odunze as a prospect. I thought he had a solid rookie season. And like, one thing that you said earlier, Adam, was that like Ben Johnson inherited Rome Odunze, which is true. But then he inherited Rome Odunze and proceeded to run his entire offense through him in the first 8 weeks of the season before he picked up the foot fracture. And when Rome Odunze played, I mean, he was awesome to me outside of contested catch situations, which was a problem for him last year, and he does need to improve on that. But 85th percentile success rate versus man, 93rd percentile success rate versus press, while not playing like an X-only role. Again, I think people misunderstand that about Rome Odunze. Like, this guy played all 3 receiver positions last year, was in the slot on 29% of his sampled snaps, outside on 64.9%. He was off ball on 47%. Like, this is not just a vertical X receiver. He ran a ton of those breaking routes we talked about that like DJ Moore wasn't great on. Rome Odunze was awesome on those. He's a high-end separator. Like, you tell me I can bet on a guy who does need to like tweak out some final details in his game, no question about it, but separates at that level and is playing in an off, like what I think is going to be a top 3 offense this year, with one of the best coaches in the NFL, with other good surrounding players and a quarterback that I think is ascending. Like, I will make that bet every single day of the week. Good to hear him kind of clarify the stuff on the foot injury, because that would be the only kind of question I would have for him, is what like health levels he at. But I think this is, to me, again, in my opinion, this is a guy who already broke out last year and just suffered a foot fracture in the middle of the season.
Yeah. People talk about the catchable target rate a lot on Rome. And to me, that kind of speaks to where these guys are used. Like, Caleb is not that accurate. Yeah. And so the deeper down the field you go, like your catch rate is going to go down. And so people are like, oh my God, the catchable target rate was so low, it's got to bounce back. Yeah, it might bounce back some. I don't think he's ever going to be like an elite catchable target guy. And as Harmon said, he struggled in contested catches, which maybe speaks to Caleb a little bit, throwing him into contested stuff too. So I think just the role will be better for Burden. That is why I would take Burden significantly ahead of Rome personally. But yeah, I know there's people out there that think Rome should go ahead of Bird.
I mean, I think that there's a scenario where all these guys smash.
For sure.
First of all, I think you can paint a picture where the offense is fairly condensed, where you got 3 pass catchers and then you got the running backs. But Odunze can get there. I've been lowest on Odunze, but I don't want to end up with 0 Odunze because I think that all these dudes can smash. Loveland, Burden, Odunze, Swift, all these guys, because of the complexion of the offense, all these guys can get there and beat their ADPs.
For sure. Certainly set up as a shootout team. Let's go to your 2 most overrated wide receivers in the NFL.
Yeah, one is Rashee Rice. I mean, only from like a fantasy perspective is he just, people think he's like what he's not. I mean, he's not bad at like his individual given role, like as a short route, success rate for zone coverage is really good for him. The problem really is more so just the Chiefs overall is they need somebody else to emerge. And like, I love Cyrus Allen. Cyrus Allen is my guy. Like I've been saying since before the draft, since he was drafted by the Chiefs, is like, you get 2 beers in me, I would tell you that's the best separator on the Chiefs roster. We took the count down to 0. He is the best separator on the Chiefs roster. He just needs to be out there because Rice just has never been a good press man coverage beater. Like I was hoping last season that you go back and see like, oh, he made a lot of steps as a route runner. He was winning down the field. He just doesn't do it. And again, that's fine for his individual role, but you can't run a healthy passing offense through that guy when you don't have complementary threats. And that's the thing. Like what makes me most nervous, I'm not going to say like don't draft Rashee Rice in fantasy because obviously if he has the role that he had last year, he will smash and he'll be great. The problems with that though is that like they did that last year and their offense had major problems doing that. And they bring in Kenneth Walker for a reason, I think, to inherit a lot of those like extension of the run game targets. So yeah, I just wouldn't write it in pen that Rice is going to have this role for the rest of his career. I think the Chiefs would be pretty bad for that, especially because, like, honestly, he was worse last year from a separation standpoint because he was coming back from an injury, and he's coming back from an injury again this year. So, yeah, I think Rice is a guy that is good at what he does. It's just like a limited picture, kind of like a poor man's Deebo Samuel to me.
Yeah, I don't love getting super high on a wide receiver who goes in the 3rd round, whose offense is better when they don't go through him. Like that seems like a pretty bad thing. We are slightly below market. Market is around 29 overall on Rashee Rice right now. All right, Harmon. By the way, Evan is way down on Rashee Rice, 43 overall for Evan on Rashee Rice here right now. All right. Last one, Harmon, your 2nd most overrated wide receiver.
Yeah, I think this guy's fine. Like, I don't think Jordan Addison is a bad NFL player, but I kind of see him get grouped in with like, the like some of the best number 2 receivers in the NFL. And I think he's like a fine number 2 receiver in the NFL. So I kind of struggled to pick like another guy that I thought is really overrated, but I just kind of generally think that the whole Vikings ecosystem is a little bit overrated. Like Justin Jefferson's awesome, one of the best receivers of the reception perception era, 2014 to current, but I think Addison's a guy who's like 56th percentile success rate versus man, 20th versus zone. And he's really more of like a boom or bust downfield receiver to me. He's not a guy that runs a lot of routes closer to the line. Actually, his 5.9% slant route rate is the 2nd lowest I've ever charted in the history of reception perception. Like he runs a lot of these boom or bust downfield routes. He's pretty good at those, but I think is a little bit more volatile maybe than his profile is credited.
I mean, I'm getting scared on Addison, not just because of what Harmon said, which I certainly respect, but also like if Kyler Murray can't just ice JJ McCarthy in this quarterback competition, what does that say about Kyler Murray? So, and Kyler Murray got benched for Jacoby Brissett and got outplayed by Jacoby Brissett. So like, I'm starting to get a little queasy on both Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, where they go. So yeah. All right. This was awesome. Learned a ton. Harmon, tell the people where they can find you and where they can find your work.
Yeah, Yahoo Fantasy Forecast is live 5 days a week, Sunday to Thursday, wherever you get your podcast, YouTube channel as well. Josh and Hayden in the mix now as well. So just hell of a time to be at Yahoo. But receptionperception.com, if you like anything that you heard here today, reception perception is bigger and better than ever. We got a new player comparison tool, my dynasty rankings. You compare them to the market, and I'm still putting out profiles every single Monday leading up till August 31st for our last call drop. So it should have 70 players, 60 to 70 players, just NFL players, not many more prospects, over 30 prospects in addition to that on the site by the time week 1 rolls around. If you liked what you heard today, you will definitely like receptionperception.com.
All right. Reception Perception is awesome. Check it out for sure. And as always, thank you, Matt, for all of the time. For Evan, for Matt, for producer Luke, producer Ryan, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.